Dobro večer, good evening, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's really a pleasure for me to be here tonight. Actually, I have a very serious speech to deliver, and I feel a bit guilty about this because this is such a beautiful and joyous setup. So please bear with me, and if you think it's going a little bit too long, just start, clicking on your glass or something like this, or make some sign. But let me say a few things. I arrived in Serbia a few weeks ago, so it's a perfect timing for me to hear about the political and the economic situation in Serbia tonight and tomorrow. I would also like to take this opportunity to share a little bit of the UN vision on both globally and locally, particularly tonight on the role of the private sector, which is sometimes a bit of an unusual topic for the United Nations. I actually, like several of you, I spent quite a bit of time today to talk about human rights, and as you know, human rights is at the core of the United Nations work in Serbia and globally, of course, and it's the common thread to all the sustainable goals. Ipsos did a survey in Serbia in the past few weeks on the perceptions about human rights. And interestingly, the number one issue that people raised as a violation of the human rights was the right to work. There were also other topics, but generally it was very clear through the survey that people identify social injustice with human rights violations primarily through the right to decent work. And this is particularly prevalent amongst young people. Businesses, the private sector, can do a lot within the context of their activities to support and respect the observance of basic human rights within their own walls. They can act on gender parity, on equality of salary. They can act on prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace. They can have a more inclusive policy on bringing in, recruiting people with different abilities. This is part of the global action that we promote to leave no one behind. And you will hear the UN talking about this over and over again. Responsible businesses also need external stability to drive, and that's sound institutions, good governance, public confidence in the prospect for personal safety in a larger piece. And businesses need people with the right skills and commitment, which means good quality education. So all these elements together can only be generated if we address the broader human rights agenda. Together, it's the responsibility for all of us in this room. I told you this would be a serious speech, okay? So bear with me, I have two more points. My second point is on the role of the private sector in realizing and financing the global Agenda 2030. So again, the responsibility of everybody in this room. Last September, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, launched a global call inviting all stakeholders, including and particularly the private sector, to generate solutions for the acceleration of the realization of Agenda 2030. And I'm assuming everybody here knows about Agenda 2030. Many of you, I believe, in this room are already engaged in the Global Compact, which is an association of businesses that are trying to align their strategies and operations with universal principles on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And I believe also colleagues from the UN and international financial institutions are quite extensively involved with the private sector in Serbia on that one. A very recent initiative that might also be of interest, in October 2019, 30 leaders of multinational companies have launched the Global Investors for Sustainable Financing. And this was developed with the UN. So top executives of these 30 companies have publicly committed to act as agent of change in their own companies and more widely. A very important initiative, maybe that can be replicated here in Serbia. And it's not new to you that businesses need long-term investment policies that serve the society, not just the shareholders. And this is starting to happen. For example, more serious stuff, major pension funds are turning to impact investment in affordable housing and renewable energies. This is something that the UN is really promoting and working in many countries around the world. Recently, more than 130 banks with a total value of $47 trillion in assets have signed up to Principles for Responsible Banking, designed in collaboration with the UN. Again, something that we may want to look into in Serbia. So actually, what are the three biggest hurdles in countries generally for the Agenda 2030 to progress faster? Number one, government system that are still 2 weeks, or governance system, I should say, that are still 2 weeks, and therefore investors are reluctant to invest. Number two, the lack of capacities globally to develop and implement large-scale big programs. And number three, entrenched interests that still favor the use of fossil fuel and the status quo. How much this is true for Serbia, you know better than me, at least at this stage. But sustainable financing is becoming a mega trend. So I hope again that we can make this happen in Serbia, and maybe this is something that will be discussed tomorrow. And this leads to my last point. I still haven't heard anything, so last point is on climate change and the environment. And this is a very important topic for me, but also for the UN. You may recall that in September, the UN Secretary General has said that climate change is going to be the defining topic for this decade. So I'm very optimistic, and I will talk only about the positive. As you know, there is a greater awareness on climate change. There is a lot of activism on climate change. So for me, this means that we have a youth, a young humanity that is very motivated to push this agenda forward. Many solutions already exist, the technical solutions, financial solutions, to promote sustainable approach in many sectors. Why are things not moving faster? Maybe this is something we can also discuss tomorrow. One response is that basic human reactions to change is resistance, and that most humans, systems, and institutions will change only when facing a shock. So, businesses face a choice. Businesses can either be part of the solution or they can be a problem. I think when you look at Serbia, we see, at least in the UN, we see a lot of opportunities to shift model to promote the green economy in the energy sector, in the transport, in the agriculture. There are many initiatives that we can also upscale to develop the circular economy. There is an urgency to address pollution, and the urban agenda is also critical. So everywhere where we look, we see opportunities for good development, and there is a lot of resources available in the country. So both the political leadership and business leadership need to step up their action on climate change and also on all the other matters that I briefly touch upon tonight. Let's make sure that we work better and faster together on this topic as well. We have 10 years to make this happen. This is called a decade of action. This is something that the Secretary General will keep repeating to all of us on an annual basis, at least. And by the way, the decade of action will only accelerate the process of the EU accession. So I look forward to working with all of you. In the coming years, I'm going to be here for a few years, and to create a future of peace, stability, and prosperity in Serbia. Thank you, voilà, and bon appétit.
Thank you.